Have you ever heard of the Hinterkaifeck murders? It's arguably one of the most disturbing mysteries in German history, a gruesome series of killings in 1922 that has never been solved. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into this awful case. So let's get into it. So just where exactly is Hinterkaifeck? To understand this murder mystery, we need to know a little bit about the location. The name Hinterkaifeck translates roughly to backyard stable or backstable, which actually describes a part of the property. It was a small plot of land isolated from nearby civilization. In fact, it was around 7 kilometers away from the closest village. The main road stopped 2 kilometers from the farm, and a dirt path led to the front door. This isolation was probably the main reason it took so long for police to find out about the crimes at Hinterkaifeck, because the people who lived there were largely kept to themselves. That brings us to our first family, the Grubers. The family living on the property was the Gruber family. There was Andreas, the head of the family, his wife Castilia, and their daughter Victoria. Andreas was 63 years old at the time, and he was known to be grumpy and ill. In fact, he wasn't particularly well liked in the local community. Kezia was his second wife. She had died previously, and she was 72 years old. Victoria was Andreas's daughter from his previous marriage, and she was a spinster. That is to say, she was an adult woman who never married. She lived with her 2 children, Cecilia, who was 7, and Joseph, who was just 2. Finally, there was Maria Baumgartner, a young maid who had just started working for the family. Now, this family wasn't particularly close-knit. Andreas and Victoria were known to squabble a lot, and it's been suggested that the two weren't getting along well when the murders occurred. In addition, there had been some unusual happenings around the farm in the weeks prior. For instance, Andreas often spoke about how he saw strange tracks in the snow leading up to the house, but none leaving. Then there was the strange noise in the attic. Apparently the sound of footsteps could be heard up there, although no one ever went up to check. And lastly, a key belonging to Andreas's private bedroom was stolen. In the end, however, all of these incidents were put down to coincidence, and nothing really was given much thought. Then, on the night of March 31st, 1922, something terrible happened. Sometime in the early hours of April, the whole family was killed. Now what exactly happened at the farm that night is a matter of speculation. We can only guess and draw conclusions from the facts we know. But here's one possible scenario. Let's start with a bang. Imagine it, a cold night in 1922. You re-inside your house sleeping with your children in the next room. Suddenly, a loud gunshot pierces the air. Startled, you wake up, half expecting someone to kick in the door. But all is silent. Maybe you just imagined it. You go back to sleep. But then another bang. A window is smashed, wood splinters flying everywhere. Fear grips you as you rush to shield your children. Is it an animal? A falling tree? Then you see it. A shadow flashes in the moonlight, quickly disappearing. You peek out the window. Whoever, or whatever it was, is gone. Perhaps there's nothing to worry about. You tell yourself, trying to ignore the fear creeping up your spine. You tuck your kids back in and try to calm them down, whispering soothing words in the dark. But sleep has fled, and now you're wide awake. All night long, you hear strange noises, footsteps outside your home, voices in the wind. The hours crawl by, and with each creak and moan, your anxiety grows. Finally, the first light of dawn creeps in, chasing away the darkness. Exhausted and terrified, you wait for the sun to rise, hoping for a new day and peace of mind. But as the sun climbs higher, reality sets in. Something isn't right. The animals are restless, the silence deafening. You step outside, fear turning your blood to ice. The world seems different, more menacing than before. You're not alone. You feel it in your bones. But let's move away from the fictionalized account and talk about the reality. When the police did arrive, they found a truly horrific sight. All 6 members of the Gruber family were dead. Not only that, but they had been killed in a truly brutal way. Their skulls had been caved in with a mattock, a heavy gardening tool that was found near the bodies. The young Cecilia had also had clumps of her hair torn out, indicating that she had tried to resist or scream. Clearly whoever had done this hadn't held back. But here's where the case gets weird. The killer had stayed at the house after the murders, eating food and tending to the animals. It really seems like they had intended to stay there long term. In fact, the dog was fed and watered. The fireplace was used and fresh bread was baked. It really seemed like a monster had been living at the house after killing the family. Whoever he was, he had washed the blood off his hands and clothes and cleaned himself up. But it seems the killer made a fatal mistake. According to the investigators, the fire didn't burn properly, suggesting that the person who had used it hadn't done so before. Also, the cleaning hadn't been entirely thorough, and a few traces of blood remained. These were missed by the initial investigators, but would be picked up on later. And that leads us to the investigation. The police spent months trying to figure out who could have committed such heinous acts. Over 100 people were questioned. In the end, though no charges were ever laid, one of the main suspects was a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He was a 38-year-old farmer who lived on a neighboring farm. He had had an affair with Victoria in the past, and many suspected that he could have killed her, as well as the baby Joseph, whom he may have believed to be his son. However, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, and he was never formally named a suspect. Other theories have included a robbery gone wrong, a personal vendetta, or even an axe murderer. But again, none of these have ever been proven. To this day, the case remains a mystery. No one knows for sure who killed the Gruber family and why. What's more, since the killer had mingled with the locals, he or she had access to the crime scene, and there's a good chance that some evidence was lost due to contamination. This is likely why there's so much conflicting evidence. For instance, fingerprints were lifted from the walls, and a comb belonging to a woman was found on the floor. However, both of these items were contaminated during the investigation and are no longer available to be tested with modern technology. In addition, the blood samples were analyzed in 1922, and while they were able to establish that the victims had indeed been killed by a mattock, they weren't able to extract any usable DNA. Today, the case has attracted a lot of attention. There are books, documentaries, podcasts, and even feature films that attempt to explain what happened at Hinterkaifeck. Unfortunately, all of these are merely speculative, and no one really knows what happened. What do you think? Who killed the Gruber family and why? Let me know in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to subscribe for more historical tales. Thanks for watching. See you next time.